Chapter 9. Ned Land's Tempers. How long we slept, I do not know, but our sleep must have lasted long, for it rested us completely from our fatigues. I woke first. My companions had not moved and were still stretched in their corner. Hardly roused, that means woken up, from my somewhat hard couch, I felt my brain freed, my mind clear. I then began an attentive examination of our cell. Nothing was changed inside. The prison was still a prison, the prisoners prisoners. However, the steward, during our sleep, had cleared the table. I breathed with difficulty. The heavy air seemed to oppress my lungs. Although the cell was large, we had evidently consumed a great part of the oxygen that it contained. Indeed, each man consumes in 1 hour the oxygen contained in more than 176 pints of air. This air, charged as then with a nearly equal quantity of carbonic acid, becomes unbreathable. It became necessary to renew the atmosphere of our prison, and no doubt the hole in the submarine boat. That gave rise to a question in my mind. How would the commander of this floating dwelling place proceed? Would he obtain air by chemical means, in getting by heat the oxygen contained in chlorate of potash, and in absorbing carbonic acid by caustic potash? Or a more convenient, economical, and consequently more probable alternative? Would he be satisfied to rise and take breath at the surface of the water like a cetacean, and so renew for 24 hours the atmospheric provision? So basically what he's saying is, did he create oxygen by chemicals, or did he just go up to the surface? In fact, I was already obliged to increase my respirations to eke out of this cell the little oxygen it contained, when suddenly I was refreshed by a current of pure air, and perfumed with saline emanations. So emanations is like something that comes out of something, so there is salt in the air. It was an invigorating sea breeze charged with iodine. I opened my mouth wide, and my lungs saturated themselves with fresh particles. At the same time, I felt the boat rolling. The iron-plated monster had evidently just risen to the surface of the ocean to breathe. Nice metaphor there. After the fashion of whales. I found out from the mode of ventilating the boat. When I had inhaled this air freely, I sought the conduit pipe, which conveyed to us the beneficial whiff. Beneficial means something that brings benefits. And I was not long in finding it. Above the door was a ventilator, through which volumes of fresh air renewed the impoverished atmosphere of the cell. I was making my observations when Ned and Conseil awoke almost at the same time, under the influence of this reviving air. They rubbed their eyes, stretched themselves, and were on their feet in an instant. "Did master sleep well?" asked Conseil with his usual politeness. "Very well, my brave boy. And you, Mr. Land?" "Soundly, Professor. But I don't know if I'm right or not. There seems to be a sea breeze." A seaman could not be mistaken. Oh no, a cough. And I told the Canadian all that had passed during his sleep. "Good," said he. "That accounts for those roarings we heard, when the supposed narwhal sighted the Abraham Lincoln." "Quite so, Master Land. It was taking breath." "Only, Mr. Arronax. I have no idea what o'clock it is, unless it is dinner time." "Dinner time, my good fellow? Say, rather breakfast time, for we certainly have begun another day." "So," said Conseil, "we have slept for 24 hours. That is my opinion." "I will not contradict you," replied Ned Land. "But dinner or breakfast, the steward will be welcome, whichever he brings." "Master Land, we must conform to the rules on board, and I suppose our appetites are in advance of the dinner hour." "That is just like you, Fred Conseil," said Fred impatiently. "You're never out of temper, always calm. You'd return thanks before grace and die of hunger rather than complain." Time was getting on, and we were fearfully hungry, and this time the steward did not appear. It was rather too long to leave us if they really had good intentions towards us. Ned Land, tormented by the cravings of hunger, got still more angry. I got like that when I realized I didn't have any cream eggs left. And notwithstanding his promise, I dreaded an explosion when he found himself with one of the crew. For 2 hours more, Ned Land's temper increased. He cried, he shouted, but in vain. The walls were deaf. There was no sound to be heard in the boat. All was still as death. Good simile. It did not move, for I should have felt the trembling motion of the hull under the influence of the screw. Plunged in the depths of the waters, it belonged no longer to earth. This silence was dreadful. I felt terrified. Consul was calm. Ned Land roared. But just then a noise was heard outside. Steps sounded on the metal flags. The locks were turned, the door opened, and the steward appeared. Before I could rush forward to stop him, the Canadian had thrown him down and held him by the throat. The steward was choking under the grip of his powerful hand. Consul was already trying to unclasp the harpooner's hand from his half-suffocated victim, and I was going to fly to the rescue, when suddenly I was nailed to the spot by hearing these words in French. "Be quiet, Master Land, and you, Professor, will you be so good as to listen to me?" Chapter 10. The Man of the Seas. It was the commander of the vessel who spoke. At these words, Ned Land rose suddenly. The steward, nearly strangled, tottered out on a sign from his master, but such was the power of the commander on board that not a gesture betrayed the resentment which this man must have felt towards the Canadian. Conseil, interested in spite of himself, I stupefied, told him to be quiet, awaited in silence the result of this scene. The commander, leaning against a corner of the table with his arms folded, scanned us with profound attention. Did he hesitate to speak? Did he regret the words he had just spoken in French? One might almost think so. After some moments of silence, which not one of us dreamed of breaking, "Gentlemen," said he, in a calm and penetrating voice, which is going to be a Liverpudlian voice, "I speak French, English, German, and Latin equally well. I could therefore have answered you at our first interview, but I wish to know you first, and then to reflect. The story told by each one, entirely agreeing in the main points, convinced me of your identity. I know now that chance has brought before me Monsieur Pierre Arronax, Professor of Natural History at the Museum of Paris, entrusted with a scientific mission abroad, Conseil, his servant, and Ned Land of Canadian origin, harpooner on board the frigate Abraham Lincoln of the Navy of the United States of America." I bowed assent. It was not a question that the commander put to me. Therefore, there was no answer to be made. Assent means he answered yes. This man expressed himself with perfect ease, without any accent, except a Liverpudlian one. His sentences were well turned, his words clear, and his fluency of speech remarkable. Yet I did not recognize in him a fellow countryman. He continued the conversation in these terms. "You have doubtless thought, sir, that I have delayed long in paying you this second visit. The reason is that, your identity recognized, I wish to weigh maturely what part to act towards you. I've hesitated much. Most annoying circumstances have brought you into the presence of a man who has broken all the ties of humanity. You've come to trouble my existence." "Unintentionally," said I. "Unintentionally," replied the stranger, raising his voice a little. "Was it unintentionally that the Abraham Lincoln pursued me all over the sea? Was it unintentionally that you took passage in this frigate? Was it unintentionally that your cannonballs rebounded off the plating of my vessel? Was it unintentionally that Mr. Ned Land struck me with his harpoon?" I detected a restrained irritation in these words. But to these recriminations I had a very natural answer to make, and I made it. "Sir," said I, "no doubt you are ignorant of the discussions which have taken place concerning you in America and Europe. You do not know that divers accidents, caused by collisions with your submarine machine, have excited public feeling in the two continents. I admit the hypothesis without number by which it was sought to explain the inexplicable phenomenon of which you alone possess the secret. But you must understand that in pursuing you over the high seas of the Pacific, the Abraham Lincoln believed itself to be chasing some powerful sea monster of which it was necessary to rid the ocean at any price. half-smile curled the lips of the commander. Then in a calmer tone, "Mr. Arronax," he replied, "dare you affirm that your frigate would not have soon have pursued and cannonaded a submarine boat as a monster?" Cannonaded means to bomb it, basically. This question embarrassed me, for certainly Captain Farragut might not have hesitated. He might have thought it his duty to destroy a contrivance of this kind, as he would a gigantic narwhal. "You understand then, sir," continued the stranger, "that I have the right to treat you as enemies." I answered nothing, purposely, for what good would it be to discuss such a proposition when force could destroy the best arguments? So what he's saying here is that why is it worth arguing with Captain Nemo when he could, quite simply, somebody else could attack the submarine? "I have hesitated for some time," continued the commander. "Nothing obliged me to show you hospitality. If I chose to separate myself from you, I would have no interest in seeing you again. I could place you upon the deck of this vessel which served you as a refuge. I could sink beneath the waters and forget that you had ever existed. Would not that be my right?" "It might be the right of a savage," I answered, "but not that of a civilized man." "Professor," replied the commander quickly, "I am not what you call a civilized man. I've done with society entirely, for reasons which I alone have a right of appreciating. I do not therefore obey its laws, and I desire you never allude to them again before me." That was said plainly. A flash of anger and disdain kindled in the eyes of the unknown, and I had a glimpse of a terrible past in the life of this man. Not only had he put himself beyond the pale of human laws, but he'd made himself independent of them, free in the strictest acception of the word, quite beyond their reach. Who then would dare to pursue him at the bottom of the sea, when on its surface he defied all attempts made against him? What vessel could resist the shock of his submarine monitor? What cuirass, however thick, could withstand the blows of his spur? No man could demand from him an account of his actions. God, if he believed in one, his conscience, if he had one, were the sole judges to whom he was answerable. These reflections crossed my mind rapidly, whilst the stranger personage was silent, absorbed, and as if wrapped up in himself. I regarded him with fear mingled with interest, as doubtless Oedipus regarded the Sphinx. Now, Oedipus, I said it wrong just, is a character from Greek mythology. I'm not going to explain it here, but if you're interested, look it up. It's a bit weird. After rather a long silence, the commander resumed the conversation. "I have hesitated," said he, "but I've thought that my interest might be reconciled with that pity to which every human being has a right. You'll remain on board my vessel, since fate has cast you there. You will be free, and in exchange for this liberty I shall only impose one single condition. Your word of honour to submit to it will suffice." "Speak, sir," I answered. "I hope this condition is one which a man of honour may accept." "Yes, sir. It is this. It is possible that certain events unforeseen may oblige me to consign you to your cabins for some hours or some days, as the case may be. As I desire never to use violence, I expect from you, more than all the others, a passive obedience. In thus acting, I take all the responsibility. I acquit you entirely, for I make it an impossibility for you to see what ought not to be seen. Do you accept this condition?" Then things took place on board which, to say the least, were singular, and which ought not to be seen by people who were not placed beyond the scale of social laws. Amongst the surprises which the future was preparing for me, this might not be the least. "We accept," I answered. "Only I will ask your permission, sir, to address one question to you, and one only." "Speak, sir." "You said that we should be free on board." "Entirely." "I ask you then, what do you mean by this liberty?" "Just the liberty to go, to come, to see, to observe even all that passes here, save under rare circumstances. The liberty, in short, which we enjoy ourselves, my companions and I. It was evident that we did not understand one another. Pardon me, sir, I resumed, but this liberty is only what every prisoner has of pacing his prison. It cannot suffice us. It must suffice you, however. What? We must renounce for ever seeing our country, our friends, our relations again? Yes, sir, but to renounce that unendurable worldly yoke. Now, a yoke is something that went across the shoulders of buffalo or horses. It's the heavy weight that they used to drag the plough. So a yoke is like a weight that you've got to carry. Yes, sir, but to renounce that unendurable worldly yoke which men believe to be liberty is not perhaps as painful as you think. Well, exclaimed Ned Land, never will I give my word of honour not to try to escape. Didn't ask you for your word of honour, Mr. Land, answered the commander coldly. Sir, I replied, beginning to get angry in spite of myself, you abuse your situation towards us. It's cruelty. No, sir, it's clemency. You're my prisoners of war. I keep you when I could, by a wage, plunge you into the depths of the ocean. You attacked me. You came to surprise a secret which no man in the world must penetrate, the secret of my whole existence. And you think that I'm going to send you back to that world which must know me no more. Never. In retaining you, it's not who you guard, it's myself. These words indicated a resolution taken on the part of the commander, against which no arguments would prevail. So, sir, I rejoined, you give us simply the choice between life and death. Simply. My friends, said I, to a question thus put there is nothing to answer, but no word of honour binds us to the master of this vessel. None, sir, answered the unknown. So, the unknown is the commander. None, sir, answered the unknown. Then, in a gentler tone, he continued, now permit me to finish what I've got to say to you. I know you, Monsieur Arronax. You and your companions will not, perhaps, have so much to complain of in the chance which has bound you to my fate. You will find amongst the books which are my favourite study the work which you have published on the depths of the sea. I've often read it. You have carried your work as far as terrestrial science permitted you, but you do not know all. You have not seen all. Let me tell you then, Professor, that you will not regret the time passed on board my vessel. You're going to visit a land of marvels. These words of the commander had a great effect upon me. I cannot deny it. My weak point was touched, and I forgot for a moment that the contemplation of these sublime subjects was not worth the loss of liberty. Besides, I trusted to the future to decide this grave question. So I contented myself with saying, by what name ought I to address you? Sir, replied the commander, I am nothing to you but Captain Nemo, and you and your companions are nothing to me but the passengers of the Nautilus. Captain Nemo called. A steward appeared. The captain gave him his orders in that strange language which I did not understand. Then turning towards the Canadian and Conseil, a repast awaits you in your cabin, a meal, said he. Be so good as to follow this man. And now, Monsieur Arronax, our breakfast is ready. Permit me to lead the way. I am at your service, Captain. I followed Captain Nemo, and as soon as I had passed through the door, I found myself in a kind of passage lighted by electricity, similar to the waist of a ship. After we had proceeded a dozen yards, a second door opened before me. I then entered a dining room, decorated and furnished in severe taste. High oaken sideboards, inlaid with ebony, stood at the two extremities of the room, and upon their shelves glittered china, porcelain, and glass of inestimable value. The plate on the table sparkled in the rays which the luminous ceiling shed around, while the light was tempered and softened by exquisite paintings. In the centre of the room was a table, richly laid out. Captain Nemo indicated the place I was to occupy. The breakfast consisted of a number of dishes, the contents of which were furnished by the sea alone, and I was ignorant of the nature and mode of preparation of some of them. I acknowledged that they were good, but they had a peculiar flavour, which I easily became accustomed to. These different ailments appeared to me to be rich in phosphorus, and I thought they must have a marine origin. Captain Nemo looked at me. I asked him no questions, but he guessed my thoughts and answered of his own accord the questions which I was burning to address to him. "The greater part of these dishes are unknown to you," he said to me. "However, you can partake of them without fear. They're wholesome and nourishing. For a long time I have renounced the food of the air, and I'm never ill now. My crew who were healthy are fed on the same food." But he's now going to describe lots of foodstuffs made from things in the sea. Now, there are a lot of strange Latin names of fish and sea creatures, but this is a great example of how reading develops your understanding of words without necessarily knowing what the individual words mean. Now, I could explain to you the Latin terms I'm about to use, but I don't really need to, as long as you have an understanding that all of these are just strange things you find in the sea that taste like different things. Now, that is the beauty of reading a more advanced text, because you can read a section of a book, not know exactly what the words mean, but you can guess what they mean. And that adds to your understanding. You'll see what I mean when I read you this page. "So," said I, "all these eatables are the produce of the sea?" "Yes, Professor, the sea supplies all my wants. Sometimes I cast my nets in tow and I draw them in ready to break. Sometimes I hunt in the midst of this element which appears to be inaccessible to man, and quarry the game which dwells in my submarine forests. My flocks, like those of Neptune's old shepherds, graze fearlessly in the immense prairies of the ocean." That is an amazing simile there. He's comparing going out fishing to chasing sheep in a forest or on a prairie. "I have a vast property there which I cultivate myself, and which is always sown by the hand of the Creator of all things." "I can understand perfectly, sir, that your nets furnish excellent fish for your table. I can understand that you hunt aquatic game in your submarine forests. But I cannot understand at all how a particle of meat, no matter how small, can figure in your bill of fare." "This, which you believe to be meat, Professor, is nothing else than fillet of turtle. Here are also some dolphins' livers, which you take to be ragout of pork. My chef is a clever fellow, who excels in dressing these various products of the ocean. Taste all these dishes. Here is a preserve of holothura, which a Malay would declare to be unrivalled in the world. Here is a cream of which the milk has been furnished by the cetacea, and the sugar by the great fucus of the North Sea. And lastly, permit me to offer you some preserve of anemones, which is equal to that of the most delicious fruits." I tasted more from curiosity than as a connoisseur. Connoisseur is somebody like Mr. Smith who really enjoys their food, whilst Captain Nemo enchanted me with his extraordinary stories. "Do you like the sea, Captain?" Sorry. "Do you like the sea, Captain?" "Yes, I love it. The sea is everything. It covers 7/10 of the terrestrial globe. Its breath is pure and healthy. It's an immense desert where man is never lonely, because he feels life stirring on all sides. The sea is only the embodiment of a supernatural and wonderful existence. It's nothing but love and emotion. It's the living infinite, as one of your poets has said. In fact, Professor Nature manifests herself in it by her three kingdoms: mineral, vegetable, and animal. The sea is the vast reservoir of nature. The globe began with sea, so to speak, and who knows if it won't end with it. In it is supreme tranquillity. The sea does not belong to despots. Upon its surface man can still exercise unjust laws, fight, tear one another to pieces, and be carried away with terrestrial horrors. But at 30 feet below its level, their reign ceases, their influence is quenched, and their power disappears. Ah, sir, live in the bosom of the waters. There's only independence. There I recognise no masters. There I am free." Captain Nemo suddenly became silent in the midst of this enthusiasm, by which he was quite carried away. For a few moments he paced up and down, much agitated. Then he became more calm, regained his accustomed coldness of expression, and turning towards me, "Now, Professor," said he, "if you wish to go over the Nautilus, I am at your service." Captain Nemo rose. I followed him. A double door contrived at the back of the dining room opened, and I entered a room equal in dimensions to that which I had just quitted. It was a library. High pieces of furniture, of black violet ebony inlaid with brass, supported upon their wide shelves a great number of books uniformly bound. They followed the shape of the room, terminating at the lower part in huge divans covered with brown leather, which were curved to afford the greatest comfort. Light light movable desks, made to slide in and out at will, allowed one to rest one book while reading. In the centre stood an immense table covered with pamphlets, amongst which were newspapers already of an old date. The electric light flooded everything. It was shed from 4 unpolished globes, half sunk in the volutes of the ceiling. So volutes, like little dips where the ceiling goes in and out. I looked with real admiration at this room, so ingeniously fitted up, and I could scarcely believe my eyes. "Captain Nemo," said I to my host, who had just thrown himself on one of the divans, "this is a library which would do honour to more than one of the continental palaces, and I am absolutely astonished when I consider that it can follow you to the bottom of the seas." "Where could one find greater solace or solitude or silence, Professor?" replied Captain Nemo. "Did your study in the museum afford you such perfect quiet?" "No, sir, and I must confess that it's a very poor one after yours. You must have 6,000 or 7,000 volumes here." 12,000, Monsieur Arronax. "These are the only ties which bind me to the earth. But I'd done with the world on the day when my Nautilus plunged for the first time beneath the waters. That day I bought my last volumes, my last pamphlets, my last papers, and from that time I wish to think that men no longer think or write. These books, Professor, are at your service besides, and you can make use of them freely." I thanked Captain Nemo and went up to the shelves of the library. Works on science, morals, and literature abounded in every page, in every language, but I did not see one single work on political economy. That subject appeared to be strictly prescribed. Strange to say, all these books were regularly arranged in whatever language they were written, and this medley proved that the captain of the Nautilus must have read indiscriminately the books which he took up by chance. "Sir," said I to the captain, "I thank you for having placed this library at my disposal. It contains treasures of science, and I shall profit by them." "This room is not only a library," said Captain Nemo, "it's also a smoking room." "A smoking room?" I cried. "Then one may smoke on board?" "Certainly." "Then, sir, I'm forced to believe that you have kept up a communication with Havana. That's where cigars come from." "Not any," answered the captain, "except this cigar, Monsieur Arronax. And although it does not come from Havana, you'll be pleased with it, if you are a connoisseur." I took the cigar which was offered me. Smoking is bad, kids. Its shape recalled the London ones, but it seemed to be made of leaves of gold. I lighted it at the little brazier, which is a little stove, not to be confused with a brazier, which was supported upon an elegant bronze stem, and drew the first whiffs with the delight of a lover of smoking who had not smoked for 2 days. "It is excellent," said I. "It's not tobacco?" "No," answered the captain. "This tobacco comes neither from Havana nor from the East. It's a kind of seaweed, rich in nicotine, with which the sea provides me, but somewhat sparingly." At that moment Captain Nemo opened a door which stood opposite to that by which I had entered the library, and I passed into an immense drawing-room, splendidly lighted. It was a vast 4-sided room, 30 feet long, 18 wide, and 15 high. A luminous ceiling, decorated with light arabesques, shed a soft clear light over all the marvels accumulated in this museum. For it was in fact a museum in which an intelligent and prodigal hand had gathered all the treasures of nature and art, with the artistic confusion which distinguishes a painter's studio. 30 first-rate pictures, uniformly framed, separated by bright drapery, ornamented the walls which were hung with tapestry of severe design. I saw works of great value, the greater part of which I had admired in the special collections of Europe and in the exhibitions of paintings. The several schools of the old masters were represented by a Madonna of Raphael, a Virgin of Leonardo da Vinci, a Nymph of Correggio, a Woman of Titan, an Adoration of Veronese, an Assumption of Murillo, a Portrait of Holbein, a Monk of Velasquez, a Martyr of Ribera, a pair of Rubens, 2 Flemish landscapes of Teniers, 3 little genre pictures of Gerard Dow, Metsu, and Paul Potter, 2 specimens of Géricault and Proudhon, and some sea pieces of Bachhuisen. They are all very badly pronounced famous artists. Among the work of modern painters were pictures with the signatures of Delacroix, Ingres, Decamps, Troyon, Meissonier, Dubovny, etc., and some admirable statues in marble and bronze, after the finest antique models stood upon pedestals in the corners of this magnificent museum. Amazement, as the captain of the Nautilus had predicted, had already begun to take possession of me. "Professor," said this strange man, "you must excuse the unceremonious way in which I receive you, and the disorder of this room." "Sir," I answered, "without seeking to know who you are, I recognise in you an artist." "An amateur, nothing more, sir. Formerly I loved to collect these beautiful works created by the hand of man. I sought them greedily, and ferreted them out indefatigably, without stopping to be tired. And I've been able to bring together some objects of great value. These are my last souvenirs of that world which is dead to me. In my eyes, your modern artists are already old. They have 2,000 or 3,000 years of existence. I confound them in my own mind. Masters have no age." "And these musicians?" said I, pointing out some works of Weber, Rossini, Mozart, Beethoven, Haydn, Meyerbeer, Harold, Wagner, Auber, Gounod, I think, and a number of others scattered over a large model piano organ which occupied one of the panels of the drawing room. "These musicians," replied Captain Nemo, "are the contemporaries of Orpheus, for in the memory of the dead all chronological differences are effaced. And I am dead, Professor, as much dead as those of your friends who were sleeping 6 feet under the earth." Captain Nemo was silent and seemed lost in a profound reverie, so he lost in thought. I contemplated him with deep interest, analysing in silence the strange expression of his countenance. Leaning on his elbow against an angle of a costly mosaic table, he no longer saw me. He'd forgotten my presence. I did not disturb this reverie, and continued my observation of the curiosities which enriched this drawing room. Under elegant glass cases, fixed by copper rivets, were classed and labelled the most precious productions of the sea which had ever been presented to the eye of a naturalist. My delight as a professor may be conceived. The division containing the zoophytes presented the most curious specimens of the 2 groups of polypi and echinodermes, so these are animals. In the first group, the tubipores were gorgons arranged like a fan, soft sponges of Syria, ices of the Moluccas, pentatools, an admirable Virgulia of the Norwegian seas, variegated umbellae, a whole series of madrepores which my master Milne Edwards had so cleverly classified, amongst which I remarked some wonderful flabellae, oculi of the island of Bourbon, the Neptune's car of the Antilles, superb varieties of corals, in short, every species of those curious polypi of which entire islands are formed, which one day become continents. Of the echinoderms, remarkable for their coating of spines, asterae, sea stars, pantrichinae, cometools, I'm guessing at these, asterophons, echini, holotherae, etc., represented individually a complete collection of this group. A somewhat nervous conchiologist, that's somebody who studies animals that live in shells, would certainly have fainted before other numerous cases in which were classified the specimens of molluscs. It was a collection of inestimable value, which time fails me to describe minutely. Among these specimens I will quote from memory only the elegant royal hammerfish of the Indian Ocean, whose regular white spots stood out brightly on a red and brown ground, an imperial spondyle, bright-coloured, bristling with spines, a rare specimen in the European museums. I estimated its value at not less than £1,000. A common hammerfish of the seas of New Holland, which is only procured with difficulty. Exotic Bocardia of Senegal, fragile white bivalve shells which a breath might shatter like a soap bubble. Oh, I like that. Several varieties of the Aspergillum of Java, a kind of calcareous tube edged with leafy folds and much debated by amateurs. A whole series of trochei, some a greenish-yellow, found in the American seas. Others are reddish-brown, natives of Australian waters, others from the Gulf of Mexico, remarkable for their imbricated shell. Stellari found in the southern seas, and last, the rarest of all, the magnificent spur of New Zealand, and every description of delicate and fragile shells to which science has given appropriate names. Apart, in separate compartments, were spread out chaplets of pearls of the greatest beauty, which reflected the electric light in little sparks of fire. Pink pearls torn from the Pinna Maria of the Red Sea, green pearls of the Halatite iris, yellow, blue, and black pearls, the curious productions of the divers mollusks of every ocean, and certain mussels of the watercourses of the north. Lastly, several specimens of inestimable value which had been gathered from the rarest pintadines. Some of these pearls were larger than a pigeon's egg, and were worth as much, and more than that of which the traveller Tavernier sold to the Shah of Persia for 3,000,000, and surpassed the one in the possession of the Imam of Muscat, which I believe to be unrivalled in the world. Therefore, to estimate the value of this collection was simply impossible. Captain Nemo must have expended millions in the acquirement of these various specimens, and I was thinking what source he could have drawn from to have been able thus to gratify his fancy for collecting, when I was interrupted by these words. "You're examining my shells, Professor." Unquestionably, they must be interesting to a naturalist, but for me they have a far greater charm, for I've collected them all with my own hand, and there is not a sea on the face of the globe which has escaped my researches. I can understand, Captain, the delight of wandering about in the midst of such riches. You're one of those who's collected their treasures themselves. No museum in Europe possesses such a collection of the produce of the ocean. But if I exhaust all my admiration upon it, I'll have none left for the vessel which carries it. I don't want to pry into your secrets, but I must confess that this Nautilus, with the motive power which is confined in it, the contrivances which enable it to be worked, the powerful agent which propels it, all excite my curiosity to the highest pitch. I see suspended on the walls of this room instruments of whose use I am ignorant. You'll find these same instruments in my room, Professor, where I shall have the pleasure in explaining their use to you. But first, come and inspect the cabin which is set apart for your own use. You must see how you'll be accommodated on board the Nautilus. I followed Captain Nemo, who, by one of the doors opening from each panel of the drawing-room, regained the waist. He conducted me towards the bow, and there I found, not a captain, but an elegant room. Towards the bow, not the bow. And there I found, not a captain, but an elegant, not a cabin, but an elegant room, with a bed, dressing table, and several other pieces of furniture. I could only thank my host. "Your room adjoins mine," said he, opening a door, "and mine opens into the drawing-room that we've just quitted." I entered the captain's room. It had a severe, almost a monkish aspect. A small iron bedstead, a table, some articles for the toilet. When they say the toilet, they mean washing. The whole lighted by a skylight. Hang on, I better confirm. Captain Nemo doesn't wash in a toilet. That would just be weird. No comforts, the strictest necessities only. Captain Nemo pointed to a seat. "Be as good as to sit down," as he said. I seated myself, and he began.